All right, if you're about ready, we'll get back to this goal stuff. Goals. Don't take my picture off of there. Hey. Thank you. It was you, wasn't it? Oh. All right, Jeannie mentioned this a little bit ago. And this is absolutely true, because I don't know about you all, I was 53. I was today years old, and I still didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So for kids, and you may be the case, it might be the case for you as well, not all of us knew we wanted to be teachers, and we knew we were going to be teachers since second grade. So it's likely our kids are going to change their minds, and that's okay. And as Jeannie mentioned, it might just evolve from, I maybe want to work in the car industry, or I want to work in the healthcare industry, as our example is. And as time goes on, they might refine that, not just from their changing thoughts about maybe what they want to be, but also through those assessments that we do, and the units that we put together and we work with them, or the pre-eds folks working with them, or Missouri Connections that they're doing. All of those things might help our students refine what it is they want to do based on their needs, their preferences, and all of those things. That's part of why we do those assessments. That ongoing classroom information that we gather to inform our teaching. So if they do refine what they want to do, or they could decide their junior year entirely. It could be, I want to be an LBN, and then the next thing, by their junior year, they could change their mind entirely and go into a completely different field. Or it may be different every year, and that's okay as well. Because the student has a disability in reading, and their deficit area is going to affect that post-secondary plan. It's not going to matter if they want to be an LPN or if they want to be an environmental engineer. They're going to have difficulty with reading, and so in that area it won't change. What we do to support them in that area won't change, will it? Change. Is that right? No? How do you go back? There we go. So post-secondary, well, I remember when I was teaching, I remember one of my coworkers coming in, and I literally thought his head was going to blow off, and he was bright red. He was so angry. We're going to get sued. Somebody is going to say that they're going to become a rocket scientist, and they're not going to become a rocket scientist, and we're going to get sued. Well, that's not really how the law is written. Okay? What we're planning for is what happens after high school. Right? And it's based on what we know through those transition assessments right now, what they need and what they want. Okay? And it's always about what happens after high school. It's not about what they're doing now. It's not the fact that they're working at the Six Flags, for those of you in St. Louis, or at the Walmart. It's about what they want to do after they get that training, whatever that training is. And of course, it's measurable. So everything that we're doing, this is something that in the end, we don't have control over whether or not they reach that goal, but we do have control over what we put into place to help them be more likely to be successful in whatever it is that they plan to do. I know the folks that I was talking to up here, we were talking about the process or the steps that you take. So the goals that we're writing are not an activity, right? It's not part of the process of getting a job. It's not the pursuit of the job. It's not the exploration of colleges. All of those things I will apply to go to school at Mizzou. The application is part of the process of going to school at Mizzou. I will pursue a career in the veterinary field. Well, pursuing a career is a process, and that's not what our goals are. Our goals are what they will do once they get that training. In this case, will be a veterinarian or will work in the veterinary field. You don't have to be a veterinarian to work in the veterinary field, right? One of my students years and years ago wanted to be a doctor. Well, why do you want to be a doctor? Because I want to wear a white coat. So, are there other fields that maybe he could work on and be wearing a white coat? Absolutely. I want to be a pharmacist. Why do you want to be a pharmacist? Because everything's so nice and tidy and organized, right? He didn't want to be a pharmacist. He just liked things to be not tidy and organized, and he liked to sort things. Okay? We used to write the goals. I remember writing the goals about exploring their options or seek employment or those things, and that is part of the process of working in a particular field. So look at the IEP that you have. Either you brought with you or one that we passed out. Those of you who have those. Take a quick look at those goals and see what you think. Give you what? 3 minutes? 3 minutes, please, on the clock there, Larry? No? Okay.
Waiting for your 5 seconds.
Okay. Looking at those IEPs, did the post-secondary goals line up? Are they written in measurable form, or are they written for at least education and work? Did anybody see anything that surprised you? Supported what you are already doing? If you will raise your hand if you're willing to share, we'll come around, and I'm going to let Bailey take over for the next section. All right?
He said, okay, he said he has July's work cut out for him, and his words, because I'm not going to say it, his goals suck.
Anybody else willing to share?
But what's wonderful about this is you've learned something today.
Well, yeah, like I told her, I don't feel bad having done it because now I know better.
Correct. And it's one of those things, it's from this point forward. You can't control what's already happened, what's already been written, but from this point forward, we're going to do a little bit better, right? And we know a little bit more. So I love that growth mindset. So thank you.
Yeah, we're looking at like several IEPs, and there are a lot of words like seek, pursue, explore. Take those out. Don't leave those in your post-secondary goals. Okay? So it's very matter of fact. And Lynn said it 100 times. I will do what? And I'm not going to seek or pursue or explore. I'm going to do it.
Yes, ma'am. And we had this conversation in the back over here. She said, we had the most beautiful written IEP. And then I saw the word seek. And she goes, oh, I cringed and we got called out.
We cringe. Yeah, we cringe.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, if we see seek, it's going to be called out of compliance. So you want to make sure that we really are mindful of the verbs, those action words that we are using.
We've been using the word obtain employment. Is that too much of the process still? Should we switch it to will be employed as?
Will be employed. Make it simple. Do not make it any harder than it needs to be. Black and white.
What's the difference between
all right. We're going to move on to what services and activities are necessary for the student to achieve with post-secondary goals. So once we have done our assessments, we've now created these beautiful transition goals. We're now going to look at what services can our IEP team assist us with. And we're going to have these great conversations that are going to really surround what's necessary for that student to need, or what skills are necessary for that student to get in order to achieve these post-secondary goals. So here are some areas of service and activities. I also want to mention that in your Google folder, I know that we have worked on trying to get internet a little bit better, but in your Google folder, you will find a transition service document from Ed O'Leary. This is a great resource for you and for your IEP teams, your case managers. In that document, it goes into detail on different skills, different services, activities that you can do for each of these different categories. The one I really want to highlight today is self-advocacy skills. This is an area that a lot of times we overlook. I know when I was a case manager, this was not something that I first thought about when thinking about post-secondary goals. So I want you to consider the scarcity of work right now and the importance of our students understanding their rights to employment. They need to understand how to fight for those rights. They need to understand how their disability impacts their day-to-day work. They need to be able to be engaged with ADA, right? The American Disabilities Act. They need to understand that process. They should be able to advocate for their accommodations that they need. So it's not enough just to say, oh, we're going to put them at a job site. We need them to understand their rights because they have rights. They need to understand how their disability affects their job, affects independent living, affects their schooling. They need to be able to know how to get to some of these services that our colleges offer. So very, very important. I'm going to go back to technology for a minute. Think about Zoom calls, Microsoft Meeting, Google Meets, all these different platforms we're now using. Do your students know how to access them? Do they know how to set up an invite? Do they know how to do Google Calendar? Do they understand scams for emails and phone calls? My husband had his grandma was 103 when she passed away. At 102, she got a phone call from a scammer saying that my husband was in jail and needed bond money, and that she needed to go to the bank and give this person all this money. And my sweet little Flora didn't know what to do, so she called my father-in-law saying that Andrew, my husband, was in jail. He was not in jail. Somebody was trying to scam a 102-year-old woman. Luckily, she called my father-in-law, but how many people get scammed every single day? Do our students understand that? Do they understand how to work in this virtual environment that we've now created? It is a crazy thing. I think it was Len that was talking about it earlier. How many of us felt silly when we first started Zoom, when we were all going, you're on mute, unmute yourself. Or you said something and you thought you were on mute and you didn't. I accidentally burped once and I thought I was on mute. And I was like, oh my God, I was horrified. So just the etiquette of these virtual platforms that are so wonderful, but they can also be a very scary place for our students. So thinking about those when it comes to our services. We should answer these goals when we think about what's necessary. So we should look at what activities should a student participate during this IEP cycle, what services and specific instructions are essential to develop these skills, and last but not least, does the student need or qualify for any vocational experiences right now? So those are the questions that our IEP teams should be considering when we're discussing transition services. You're going to hear me say it time and time again. Transition services are not just on one person. Spread the love around. You guys have enough to do. Okay, spread it around. Have good conversations on who are going to teach these skills. Could some of our gen ed folks help us out? Could our counselors help us out? Could related service providers help us out? Don't forget the parents. Okay? Don't forget the kid, or student, because no longer are they a kid when they're at 16, the student. So these are really good tips and tricks that you really should be thinking about. Remember that services should be different for each goal. I shouldn't see copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. A lot of times that's what we see. Remember, they need to be individualized to the student. If I bring up 3 different kids' IEPs, are those services going to look the same on every single kid? That's when we start questioning educational benefit. Are they individualized to that student? Are the services every year the same? They shouldn't be. They should be growing with the student. IEP team members should have conversations surrounding these activities for post-secondary transition. Please just don't forget, the misconception of services is that it's all on the case manager, and it's not. So I can't stress that enough. And also, don't forget about those parents assisting us in these roles. Have those parents take the students for job applications, job interviews. Teach them how to use the bus. They can go and do that. They can work on internet safety at home, all those different things. So let's look at one example. You learned about Scout earlier. Lisa talked about Scout. And we also talked about Travis. For Scout, for some transition services, one would be a community experience, such as learning how to use the public transportation system, or a call-a-ride service, such as Uber or Lyft. I just taught my mother-in-law how to use Uber this last week when we went to Florida. Oh, mama. But it worked. And she was very proud of herself after she got back to the airport on her own. So it was a good experience. Related services, social skills training for learning to greet others, resolving conflicts on jobs, expressing needs so others can assist. Think about that one, resolving conflicts on jobs. How many of you have had a conflict at your job? How many of you wish you had training on how to do this? By the time I first got into kind of like more of a leadership role, I was like, ooh, I gotta tell people I gotta manage this. This is icky. I don't know if I like this part of my job. Nobody really taught me how to resolve conflicts. If you think about our kids right now, everybody's this instant gratification stuff. We need help with empathy and sympathy and those personal skills. So that's a good one. When we look at Travis, he needs to learn how to use cards with visual processes for fixing various parts of a car. Related services, they can use social skills to advocate for himself, so he knows who to go to assistance for. Okay, I love this legal case right here, and I have to bring it up because this was at the LRP conference, and I thought it was really good. I am not a lawyer, but I love learning about new cases. Tiffany Smith knows what I'm talking about. She likes them too. This was about a student in Montana who had cognitive delays and was in speech impairment. During high school, this student had an IEP and did have a transition plan based on age-appropriate transition services. And his post-secondary goal, one of his post-secondary goals, was that he would attend a community college. The argument that the parent had was that the post-secondary goal of attending a community college was inappropriate because the student needed more life skills training, such as obtaining a driver's license and learning more functional math skills. And the parents claimed that he needed more help learning how to live independently. Parents were wanting the student to get another year of services with the high school. So the question became, was the student's post-secondary goal of attending a community college inappropriate? The next question I want you guys to think about is, did the student need more life skills training on how to live independently? And was this a denial of FAPE, free appropriate public education? I'm going to give you 1 minute with your team. Have a conversation. What do you guys think? How did the courts rule? And don't cheat and look forwards. All right. Thumbs up. Was it a denial of FAPE, yes or no? Let me see your thumbs. What do y'all think? I'm seeing people afraid to use their thumb. Don't be afraid. Okay, let's find out. No, it was not a denial of FAPE, which is good for school districts, guys. So since the transition plan developed for the student addressed training, education, employment, and independent living, and took into consideration the student's interests, needs, and preferences, no IDEA violation was found. Some parents may want post-secondary transition plans as a guarantee that their child will be wholly independent whenever they leave high school. However, and this is a big kicker, however, the fact that a student needs some assistance after they graduate does not prove that their transition plan was inadequate. Not only did the student graduate with a regular high school diploma, but they also got accepted to a local community college. That's a huge thing. And this student actually obtained a job right then and there and worked in an assisted living facility. Neither the lack of the driver's license nor her skills in functional math supported the claim that there was a denial of FAPE and that the transition plan was inappropriate. I think the big kicker was what the investigator said at the bottom that's highlighted. Being able to live independently is not the test. So that's just something to think about. All right, and I'm going to hand it off to Lisa.
Okay, so we know that you all have been sitting out here a long time, and we will be finished by 4. That's our mission. So a little more patience. So course of study is also part of the transition service plan, and a lot of times we don't think about it that way. We think about it just as another form to fill out in our massive IEP forms. When you think about the course of study, use your guidance counselor, because they're doing this now with students starting in 8th grade. They start what's called the ICAP process, where they're doing the course of study with students. They should be doing transition assessments with students, and they're having the kinds of conversations with all students that we used to just have in special ed, that we were required to have in special ed. So on that 4-year plan, you need to have classes for all 4 years of your high school, possibly longer if it's a student graduating on goals and you know that they're going to be there for 6 years maybe. You need to have classes for all the years that they're planning on staying. Even if the student's just in 9th grade, you need a course of study for all 4 years. So remember, it's just a plan. And if you put down classes for 10th, 11th, and 12th grade and they don't end up taking those classes, they didn't take those classes. Next year when you renew your annual IEP, then you fix that and you go forward. And then it's probably going to be adjusted every year. I can't think, in a previous life I was also a high school counselor. I can't think of any student I ever worked with that started out in 9th grade and did not change their course of study by their senior year. It just happens. A lot of them change it every semester. So it is going to change. And it needs to be linked to their post-secondary goals and transition needs. So you should see electives on that course of study that have something to do with what their employment goal is, what their education goal is. For example, if a student wants to be a welder, you might see some ag classes, because in a lot of ag classes they learn how to weld. If a student wants to work in a daycare, then maybe some FACS classes are appropriate because they cover child development in there. So if you're in a small district, you have to be a little bit more creative about how you think about this, but there are options, there are opportunities for students to talk about those kinds of things. And then next thing I want you to think about is make sure that you update this course of study annually. Don't just copy and paste the same 4-year plan year after year after year. Fix it, update it. And And when you think about the courses that are meaning and relevant, as I said before, think beyond just academics. So if it's a student that's really struggling in social skills or needs how to learn how to work in groups, what classes might they take to help them learn some of these skills? If it's a student that wants to pursue a career in graphic design or maybe auto body, then think about what sort of classes might be appropriate. We had a student that wanted to be a tattoo artist. And you think about now, you think, well, that's not so bizarre. In 2007 and 2008, that was a little bit, we thought, how are we going to make that happen? So we really started thinking about the types of classes that would be appropriate for him. So using the IEP that you brought with you or the ones on the table, look through your post-secondary or look through your course of study and your transition services. See if your post-secondary services and activities listed in each area line up with the goal. Do you have activities and services for each goal that are different? I shouldn't see the same activities and services under your education section as I see under your employment section. Are they things that can be done within this IEP cycle? And do you have that course of study, that 4-year plan? And make sure that it says the actual classes, not just elective on it. We want to see the classes that they're going to take. So take about a minute to do that, and then Bailey will be back up here to talk about the next section with you.
All right, we're going to wrap it up. Just this activity, I should say. We want to end on time, so I'm going to get a little faster here. Don't mind me. I can be like one of those auctioneers real fast if I need to. All right, so when we are thinking about, after we've talked about our course of study, the next thing we really want to think about is coordinating with services with adult agencies. So if appropriate, we need to make sure that representatives are invited, or any participating agency is invited. And we need to have that prior consent from the parent or the student if they've reached age majority. And that consent needs to happen every time the meeting happens. Okay? So once we start talking about transition, and if we want to have voc rehab there, then we need to get consent for them to be there each time. It is important to know that any agency that is responsible for providing or paying for transition services must be invited to the meeting, and a PWN must be signed by parents. Now, I want to make sure you understand they must be invited. We can't help whether or not they attend, okay? We can't force them to attend. We can't call, the cops and make them come. That's out of our control, but we have to invite them. Do not get discouraged if they don't come. We have to make sure that we are at least doing our due diligence to let them know that there is an IEP happening and that we would like them to be there. When we're thinking about our post-secondary goals and we're thinking about Form C, one thing we haven't talked about yet is writing those annual goals. So for each post-secondary goal, there must be an annual goal or goals included in the IEP that helps that student make progress towards the stated post-secondary goals. And remember, our annual goals are annually. So it's with what can they accomplish within one IEP year. I don't know if we've said it yet, but there should be this beautiful golden thread. Desi loves to talk about the golden thread. And it should start within our present levels. It should go into Form C and then the annual goals. And so it should just be this beautiful, clear, consistent message for as to why we are doing what we're doing. It should pass that stranger test. If a stranger were to pick up that IEP, would they know what to do with that student if that student were to move into your district? So it should be clear and it should be concise and it should be wrapped up in a pretty little bow with a package, like just beautiful. So it should be have that golden thread, and everything really does need to connect. When we ask questions with our team, we create better individualized goals that tie back to post-secondary goals and the student's future. Here are some of those questions that your team should consider and should have conversations on. What skills and knowledge does a student need to achieve in post-secondary goals? So we should be looking at academic skills, social skills, work skills, behavior skills. Does the annual goal we've written support post-secondary goals? And if the student accomplishes this annual IEP goal, will they be closer to reaching their post-secondary outcome? If you answer no to that, we probably need to reconsider what we're doing. Because once that student turns 16, the focal point of the IEP is post-secondary. What are they going to do once they leave? That's the goal. That is the ultimate goal. So we need to make sure that we have that the main focus. Here is a goal. This is one, just an example for an employment goal. So we see that the post-secondary upon graduation, Jamario will work in the automotive repair industry. And here is the annual goal. This does meet the standards, and it meets indicator 13 for number 6. Which basically shows you that the student is going to be prepared to successfully complete the welding courses at the Central Piedmont Community College. Here's another example for employment. I'm sorry, for education and training. Once again, this does meet the indicator 13 checklist, and it is written smart. And last but not least, here is another goal for independent living that's tied back to the annual goals. All right, and Lisa, I'm going to leave it back to you.
Okay, so we will cover the last 2 areas that we haven't talked about on indicator 13. One of those areas is the student invitation to the meeting, and then we need to make sure that our post-secondary goals are updated annually. So, student invitation. You need to make sure that your student is formally invited to the meeting when transition is discussed. Just listing them on the meeting notice won't do it, although it should be there. Their name should be on there. Listing them on the meeting participants section of the IEP won't do it. It should also be there, but that doesn't indicate that you invited them. Inviting them to the meeting officially indicates you want them to come and participate in the discussion about the future. So, actively engaging the student in discussions about their future is a big critical piece in the decision-making process. How are you supposed to come up with a transition plan for a person and you've not talked to them about what they want to do or how they want to get there? So it is super important. And sometimes I know you have the hurdle of parents do not want the student to come to the meeting. Anybody ever had that experience? Yeah, that happens sometimes, and that can be a little bit tricky, but I think we just need to keep advocating for the student, keep making our case of how important it is for that student to be there. So sometimes this too is the first time a student's attended an IEP meeting. So if that's the case, it's a good idea to have a conversation with them in advance about what is going to happen at that meeting, because a lot of times students think when they're called out of class or when they're called to do something, they think they're in trouble. So they need to know that this isn't because they're in trouble, that we'll be discussing their future, we'll talk about their goals for the future, how they can meaningfully participate, how they can understand that what they have to say is important, that there will be people there that are listening to them, and that it's an important opportunity for them to self-advocate. Remember, a lot of our special education students really struggle with that self-advocacy piece. So just a big reminder about what the invitation is and is not. It's not just their name on a meeting notification. It's not just them signing into the meeting. It actually is that separate piece of paper that's specifically addressed to the student, and it's dated prior to the meeting date. I know in some of the software programs on that meeting notice, once you mark that transition is one of the purposes of the meeting, it will automatically generate that student invitation to remind you to do that. Others do not do that. You just need to remember that you are to do that. And again, on the DESI website, this is our sample form. One of the things I really like about this sample form is it tells the student the topics that are going to be discussed, like what are your future job plans? What kind of training do you need to do this job? What do you like to do for fun? How much money does your job pay? Can you pay your bills on what this job pays? A lot of students don't think about that. They just want to, they know they want to be this, but they have a, they want to drive Corvettes and live in big houses, but their job only pays minimum wage. So sometimes that's a real downer for them. Okay. So on to post-secondary goals, make sure that they are updated annually. I would expect to see them evolve. I wouldn't expect to see the same goal 9th grade through 12th grade. And a lot of times what you see is they may stay in the same area, but it really gets narrowed down. For example, a student may say their freshman year that they want to go into construction, but by their senior year, they've narrowed that down to they're going to be a bricklayer. Or a student may say, I want to go into the healthcare field, but by senior year, they say they want to be an LPN. And so that's what you would expect to see. And then education and training would evolve the same way along with those. Okay. So at this point, when we're looking at a transitions plan from year to year, we would expect to see changes. You might also need to consider additional transition assessments. Please don't take the attitude that it's one and done. I did one freshman year, this is what they said they wanted to be, and by golly, this is what they're going to be. Because it changes, and sometimes you just need more information about the students. We talked a little bit about kiddos that are struggling with that, finding a career path. Sometimes you do just have to say, what is it you really like to do? Let's put that down this year. You can change. It's not written in stone. You don't have to absolutely be this when you grow up. And then additional assessments can also be helpful if they're struggling to find that career path that they think might be fulfilling or enjoyable. Okay, so how are we doing on time? We got 2 minutes. Okay, so very quickly, look at the IEP that you brought with you or the one on your table. Make sure that those goals line up with the services. Make sure that the student was invited. And do you have some evidence that the transition information is updated annually? Again, not that copy-paste year after year.
I was saying that in order for it to qualify, that email to qualify as an invitation, then it would have to have anything that's listed in the standards and indicators or in the state plan of what it needs to be an invitation.
Any more questions? Okay, just a final reminder. Transition planning's for the student, about the student, and with the student. It's their vision for the future. And then we come up with the plan to help them support them through that. Okay. So if you guys have any individual questions, compliance consultants will be hanging around here for a little while if you want to stay and talk to us. Otherwise, thank you for being such a kind and attentive audience, and enjoy the rest of the conference.